Welcome back to The Left Field, the podcast where four friends get together to talk about their fantasy Congress league and what the Democrats are doing in Congress from a leftist perspective. We're your hosts. I'm Alexi Jenkins.
I'm Luis Pagan.
I'm Chalman Habale.
And He-Man couldn't be here today, but we have a special guest, Kevin Pagan. Welcome, Kevin. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am a computational fluid dynamics analyst at the fluid dynamics branch at NASA in Huntsville, Alabama.
And also the brother of our beloved host, Luis.
Yes, I'm also Luis's brother.
So for the listeners, Kevin is a member of our league. So one of the 11 teams is his. So Kevin, do you want to give us a little rundown of like what your team's called, who's on it, how you're doing in the rankings?
Sure. So my team is called Senatus Populosque Americanus, and I was trying to go for like the Roman motto, like SPQR, but instead be SPQA for America.
The intellectual.
Yeah. And I probably have one of the most moderate teams of our league.
No, that's Blue Dogs for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just conservative. It's not even moderate.
Right. Let's see. I have Joe Manchin as my flagship senator.
Okay, yeah, never mind. Maybe you're conservative.
And also close behind in the moderate rankings, we got Maggie Hassan. I've also got Tammy Baldwin, so I'll have an actual progressive senator on my team, so that's good. And then my last of my senators are Mark Kelly. And for my House, I've got Jim McGovern, Ruben Gallego, Jerry Nadler, Eddie Bernice Johnson, Carolyn Maloney, and Gregory Meeks.
Jim guy was really made to govern.
That was a stupid joke. Is it paying off to have picked such a moderate team?
Well,
it did.
Not at the moment. It was at first. I was pretty high up there, but now I'm in 7th place, and it's been kind of fluctuating this week.
So we're actually going to institute a new segment this week where we profile a member of one of our teams. So we actually asked Kevin to do a profile of one of his senators, and this new segment is called Representative Yay or Nay. So Kevin is going to give us some background on this person and kind of talk us through like some of their policies, just a little bit more about them so we can get to know the Democrats who are representing our country in the Senate and the House. And then we're going to go around and we're all going to decide if we want to give this person a yay or a nay. And that's not on them as a person. This is about like their policies. So basically the deciding factor will be if you see this person's name on a piece of legislation or in the news, is your first feeling, like knowing what you know about their ideology, is this, oh yeah, this is somebody that I can trust, or like, I'm going to have to read a little bit more, get a little bit of context. So it'll basically be like a vote of confidence in this person's platform. So Kevin.
From the Left Field pod, the highest honor.
Yeah, totally. What every politician seeks out. So yeah, Kevin, go for it.
Okay, so the profile I'll be doing is going to be on Mark Kelly. And I chose him because he is a former astronaut and I work for NASA, so go hand in hand.
Gotta do it.
Yeah, had to do it. So Mark Kelly is the new junior senator from Arizona. He won the 2020 special election to replace John McCain, who passed away during his term. And yeah, he's a former astronaut and a retired U.S. Navy captain. He piloted the space shuttle 4 times, well, 2 times as a pilot, and then another 2 times in 2008 and 2011 as the captain of the mission. But he's not alone. He's got a twin brother, an identical twin brother, who's also an astronaut, Scott Kelly. It's really interesting. Recently, Scott Kelly had a mission where he was going to spend a year in space, and they were going to compare the physical, cognitive, and genetic traits on those effects on genetic traits from spaceflight on Scott Kelly and compare it to his identical twin brother, Mark Kelly. And some really interesting results there. They actually found that Scott Kelly's his telomeres on his genes, they increased in length. So usually when you age, they decrease or they shorten. But his actually increased when he was in space for a year. And that's actually a really long space flight. People are usually up in space for years at a time. So that's really interesting. But yeah, Mark Kelly, he's married to former Representative Gabby Giffords, who was the survivor of a shooting and attempted assassination in 2011, right before he was about to go up on a mission. Well, he went up anyways, but he retired shortly after that to help her recover. And they're still married. And afterwards, they founded a super PAC together. Right now, it's called Giffords, but it's aimed at strengthening gun control, advocating for universal background checks, and things like that. But yeah, right now he's a new member of the Senate. He's considered a moderate Democrat, but there's still this is just the beginning of his political career. So there's still a lot for him to do and a lot for him to show us and how progressive he really is.
So has he had any noteworthy legislation or stances that you've come across yet, or is it still kind of vague?
Well, definitely the thing that stands out the most is his advocacy on gun control. So yeah, like I said, he founded the super PAC called Giffords, and he's mostly in favor of universal background checks. But it doesn't. I don't think it goes much farther than that. I don't think they advocate for banning all guns or revoking the Second Amendment.
It's not a beta type.
Yeah. But I think it's mostly just sensible gun control is the platform for that. Also, some things I noticed are that he is strong on immigration still. Obviously being from Arizona, a border state, he wants stronger border security, but wasn't in favor of the Trump wall. And he still supports DACA, so that's good. But he was against giving pandemic relief to undocumented immigrants.
For
I agree with Chandan's thumbs down.
Yeah, for those of the people not watching on YouTube, Chandan just gave a very solemn thumbs down to that policy. Double thumbs down.
Yeah. And also recently I've seen him do a lot of work on protecting the environment in Arizona specifically. So he's been introducing bills to help protect the Grand Canyon and for giving back land to Native Americans for them to take responsibility over.
Thumbs up.
So thumbs up.
Thumbs up for that one.
Well, that's important. The desert environment actually is incredibly important when it comes to oxygen manufacturing. You'd be surprised at how much is actually made by the microbiome in the desert. So good on him for protecting the Grand Canyon.
So I'm looking at the sponsored legislation that he's had. One of them, the one you guys are referring to here, is having certain land in Pinal County, Arizona, into a trust benefit for the Gaia Indian River community. So that's good. That's good. It seems like some form of land back to some degree, probably for environmental reasons. And then he's got another one to direct funding for small businesses near the U.S. border for a border closure recovery loan program. So essentially what that, I feel like that means is we're actually going to close this border, and we know that that's going to like impact your businesses. So we're going to subsidize your businesses so we can close this border, which seems, in my opinion, seems thumbs down in my opinion. But, you know, I mean, it's once again, okay, I won't go over. Continue if you had more analysis on Mark Kelly.
Well, I just also wanted to point out, I guess, the committees that he's on. So he's on the Armed Services Committee and on several of the subcommittees on there, including Air, Land, and Strategic Forces. But he's also just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, become the chairman of the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee.
Wow. So aliens?
More like, you know, just I think they write legislation on like helping innovation in defense so that they can counter any
Thanos?
any new threats. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm done.
So he's Captain Mark Kelly, right? Was he in the armed services before becoming an astronaut?
Yeah, so he's a retired Navy captain. And he, I believe he was a aviator in the Navy.
So I did do a little bit of progressive litmus testing and took a look at some of his policies. So we have there's good news and there's bad news. No on the Green New Deal, no on Medicare for all, no on defunding the police, and
God.
no on student loan forgiveness.
Close the coffin.
He is really strong on reproductive rights, which is kind of surprising and cool. And he's also opposed to tax breaks for the super wealthy and large corporations. Scandals wise, I know last episode I said I really wanted to hear the scandals, and I found one for Mark Kelly. So it has to do with the experiment with his brother in space. So when talking about how his brother changed in space, he said, "It's gotten so bad that we recently had to release him back into the wild. He's like halfway between an orangutan and a howler monkey. We even changed his name to Rodrigo."
What is have like unpack that? What's going on? What is he even responding to?
So he was just responding to like the changes that his brother underwent while he was in space.
Clearly he was making a joke about it, but maybe joking about someone de-evolving to be Latino might not be the best move in Arizona. Just saying.
So that was in 2018, and he did apologize while he was campaigning in 2020. But yeah.
Saucy.
Spicy. These are the scandal. I mean, these are the scandals I was looking for. I wasn't hoping to find racism, but if it's there, we're going to talk about it. Okay. So does anyone have anything to add to Mark Kelly before we yay or nay?
So I'm looking at his co-sponsored legislation. And once again, co-sponsored legislation isn't like as, you know, there's a bunch of like Medicare for all co-sponsors that like almost actively denounce Medicare for all, I feel like at this stage. It's good generally. You know, secure rural schools, prohibit discrimination by sex, gender, identity, sexual orientation, protect watersheds, $12 billion for restaurant revitalization fund. What?
Wow.
No, that was the thing proposed for the budget reconciliation. I don't actually know if that one made it in. But we'll talk a little bit about that soon.
Paycheck fairness, global health. Yeah, generally fine stuff. So
he's got some environmentally progressive policies, but no Green New Deal.
None that
he hasn't taken that final step.
None that he's created. He seemed to have tacitly signed on to things that have been existing around him,
that is encouraging, though.
Yeah,
I mean, it could just be a political positioning thing.
I will also say, and you've very acutely realized this, Lexi, having drafted some upcoming freshman senators or just some newer members. He's got a 19-point average score on Fantasy Congress, which is
Alex Padilla has like 2, so that
right. So a lot of the people who are new are like bottom of the barrel in terms of points. And considering that he just came in and he has 19 points as an average,
that's active.
That's good. That's actually good. Yeah.
That's almost where some of my veteran senators.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure Ed Markey has.
So yeah. So it's also hilarious to see how low on the scale Jim Clyburn is. Like he's got like 12 points average. Jerry Nadler is also there. Okay, so I know Kevin has acutely probably been made aware of that since he's on his team. But yeah, so there's that. He seems to be a productive member of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one, that is a thing, at least.
Okay, shall we yay or nay?
But one more thing before we vote. I just wanted to point out that, he is relatively new to the political scene. This is his first office in the government, and he's the junior senator to a fairly moderate state. So I think he's got a big future ahead of him, and hopefully we'll see some more stuff from him in the future.
So are you going to be the first? Yay or nay?
Are you gonna nay?
Well, okay, then I guess I'm gonna say yay.
Chandan, yay or nay? Luis, yay or nay?
I'm going to also say nay, but again, he's very early into his career. I think he's someone we need to watch.
I agree.
I think that if push comes to shove with more progressive legislation, he might be willing to, go a little bit more progressive. Exactly. Play ball, as it were.
Yeah. I definitely think he's one to watch. I was very, very pleasantly surprised by his stance on reproductive rights, because that's a really easy thing to toss out of your platform to appeal to conservative voters if you're in a state like Arizona. So that really does impress me. And I know I went hard on him earlier with my progressive litmus test, but Mark Kelly is somebody that I am excited about. I remember following the space experiment and being really excited about it. It's just very cool, which has almost nothing to do with his policies, but it's really awesome. And he and Gabby Giffords are really sweet, and they've had a really hard time. So as people, I think they're really great. For now, I'm going to give him a nay, but I am very swayable on this point as more legislation is coming out. Because like you were saying, he is so new and there are some encouraging things there.
I think for me, in terms of the yay or nay, I mean, he seems like a dope person. I think that's unquestionable. He seems to be an awesome guy, has obviously done cool things. But in terms of in these next few years, or even this next coming decade, in terms of American politics, we need progressive champions at every level of government. And I think there's definitely a no compromise mentality that we somewhat need to take, even from just a survivalism standpoint. So my guess is that there is someone super qualified in Arizona that could take his position that's even doper, that we just don't even know about, so I'm hesitant to be fully supportive of him as a politician. I also have somewhat hesitancy around this whole fame qualification for being in government, right? There's definitely the Arnold Schwarzenegger problem, right? Where you just get it, or even the Donald Trump problem, right? Where you haven't really been in the obviously his wife is Gabby Giffords. I think that is interesting that he probably had some sort of adjacent exposure to that stuff, giving him probably some level of understanding. But do you think supporting the people who've been in the community meetings, that have been at these lower levels of government, community organized or whatever it might be, and have built their way up to these positions, I tend to support those people more.
I do think that there is something to be said. I think his career qualifications do say more about him as a person than like being an actor says about. I mean, it says a lot about Ronald Reagan.
Sure,
that he was an
no,
actor,
absolutely.
But
I mean,
think
if I traded Arnold Schwarzenegger's background for his background in terms of like actually being capable of governing or like speaking like poignantly and like thoughtfully about the issues that he's being, professionally like asked to talk about, yeah, his background is very relevant, without a doubt. But I think representatives should just be that, right? I think they should be more representatives than personalities. And I think we've definitely veered towards personality versus being a true representative of the people that govern or that are your constituents.
But I mean, he's a scientist, and like I would take more scientists in government than
100%,
more Ivy League lawyers every day. So most of the people who are going to be running for these seats are going to be those type of people who are very bought
UCLA,
into
Yale
the
Law.
system. Yeah. Who are honestly, law school, it's a brainwashing machine to get you to be complicit in the system and to be okay with the things that are happening. So I feel like there is value in having people who have legitimate expertise, not business leaders like Trump, where they're just like ripping people off. So in the rankings of things I'd want to see, community, like small community like activists are obviously higher. Like I would rather see a Cory Bush than an elite scientist, but I'd rather see an elite scientist than an elite lawyer any day of the week.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I do also appreciate that he flipped a Senate seat to help us all out.
Yeah,
so.
let's be real here. He did make some good moves there.
He did. And partially helped flip the state to a certain degree. So which is also very important.
Yeah. And he's taking up the mantle of John McCain. So there's a lot of expectations for him.
And definitely a lot of political fraughtness with that seat.
One to watch for sure.
So now I wanted to move into another new segment that we're implementing this week. So we got some listener feedback, Kevin, about how some unnamed listener wanted more like deep dives into what Congress was actually doing. So I wanted to give a little bit of background on our process so far. So our original intention for this podcast was to kind of get our teams and then go through what every member of our team was doing that week and then talk about that and dissect it, kind of like bill by bill, rep by rep. And we quickly realized that they were not doing as much as we thought. So that's why some of our earlier podcasts tend to be like extended political conversations about certain topics. We would just kind of pick one of the big topics of the week that a lot of our reps were involved in and kind of break it down. But we listened to our listener and we wanted to give a little more structure. our single listener, Kevin. Just kidding. We have more listeners than that. Just so everyone knows. My mom. So we did want to give a little bit more structure about hard numbers of what Congress is doing. So this week, the House had 294 pieces of legislation introduced, and the Senate had 176 pieces of legislation introduced. So those are big numbers. It sounds like they are doing a lot, but I want to contextualize them a little bit more. So first of all, with the introduced legislation, any member of either body can introduce whatever they want at any point in time, no holds barred. So the vast majority of this legislation will never be taken up in committee and on the floor, let alone advance to law. Like the vast majority of this is going to get killed. The second really important thing to note is that legislation, as I'm using it here, refers to two separate types of legislation. So they're bills, which actually become laws once they're passed, and then they're resolutions. And resolutions are a slightly more informal, more temporary measure. It's kind of like Congress getting together and making a statement or giving itself permission to go on to a procedural step. So a lot of the initial pieces of legislation, quote unquote, that were coming out of Congress in the first couple of weeks were all procedural. So it was things like telling the House that it can take a photograph of all the members on the first day of Congress. It was like electing people to committees, letting the president know that Congress was in session, things like that. So that has made up a big majority of the bills that have gone through so far. But there has been some substantive stuff. So this week, the House passed 13 pieces of legislation. Bills-wise, resolution-wise, one thing that's really important is House Resolution 166, which is the reconciliation bill for the stimulus. So that's like setting up the process. They passed the stimulus, and now they're setting up the process of it actually coming into law. They had some other not impactful resolutions. So it looks like 4 of these were renaming post offices in different states. And then there was another resolution that was electing members to committees. So that's been an ongoing thing. Some of the resolutions were about setting up considerations of other bills that they passed this week. And then in terms of substantive bills, there were 3 different bills, and one that was a really big deal this week. So HR 5 is the Equality Act that has to do with discrimination against LGBTQ individuals. The other 2 were HR 546, which is Effective Assistance of Counsel in the Digital Era Act, which prohibits the Department of Justice from monitoring the contents of privileged communications between incarcerated people and their legal representatives. So a big deal for the rights of prisoners and a big deal for privacy. And then
Basically, you can't read prisoners' texts to their attorneys.
yes. And privileged communication is like a legal term for the communications about a case between an attorney and the person that they're representing. And that information is not information that anyone else is supposed to be a party to. They can be, and like you can bring people in and it just destroys confidentiality, but it's like a big deal. And in court, like the attorney can't be made to testify against that person, and you can't bring in statements that were made between the 2 people. Hence why that's a big deal in those legal cases. Then the final piece of substantive legislation to come out of the House is HR 1192, Prada, Prrada, which actually has to do with Puerto Rico. So it imposes requirements on the payment of compensation to professional persons employed in voluntary cases commenced under Title III of the Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act. And this was sponsored by one of He-Man's representatives, Nydia Velasquez, that he talked about last week. Luis, do you want to give like a little bit of context about what that has to do with?
Sure. This is mostly in reference to the payouts for people that are working under Promesa. It's essentially a way for them to close some loopholes and to just to reduce corruption within the Promesa framework.
And then the Senate passed 6 pieces of legislation, which is the good news, but the bad news is only one of them was substantive. And the one that was substantive was just allowing senators and Senate offices to share employees. So nothing that really impacts the American people. The resolutions that they passed had to do with designating February 28th as Rare Disease Day, a resolution congratulating the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association for being 100 years old, a resolution designating Public Schools Week, and then celebrating Black History Month. And some of my senators were involved with passing those pieces of legislation that
I got a lot of co-sponsorship.
Yes, a lot of people were involved in that. So the whole time Congress has been going, there has only been one bill that has passed both chambers and been signed into law by Biden, and that's HR 335, which provides an exemption to a rule that limits people from being appointed as Secretary of Defense within 7 years of relief from active duty. Also very limited in its scope. Overall, yeah, that's the only law that's been passed, and then there have been 4 resolutions total, one that had to do with the body of the Capitol Police officer who was murdered on January 6th, lying in state in the rotunda, keeping the inauguration committee around after the inauguration, counting the electoral votes on January 6th, and then setting forth the federal budget for the year. Overall, there are 18 bills, including the ones we've already discussed, that have already passed at least one chamber of Congress. The important one in here is HR 1319, which is the American Rescue Plan of 2020, which is the stimulus, which we'll talk about more after the break. And then, yeah, there are 18 resolutions total, including all the ones we've already covered that are being considered on the floor, and then 13 that are being considered in committee. Overall, there are 1,907 actual bills that have been introduced in both chambers. So it's a lot of legislation, but as you can see, like the trickle down flow of it and when it becomes relevant is very, very slow. It is moving at a very slow pace, hence our lack of like a lot of stuff to talk about in previous weeks. But yeah, we just wanted to give you all that update. And then we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about the stimulus.
And we're back. And I think we're going to start this segment off with a quick rundown of HR 1319, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, also known as the Budget Reconciliation Bill or COVID Relief Stimulus Bill. So on Saturday, the House passed the HR 1319 without removing the minimum wage increase from to $15 by 2025. We will definitely get into that here in a bit. But a couple other things that are included are $1,400 stimulus checks for all of those making up to $75,000 a year and phased out to $100,000 a year. A $400 expanded weekly unemployment insurance benefits that lasts until August 29th. So this increases the unemployment insurance benefits $100 and extends it. There's also, it's a $1.9 trillion bill, so there's a lot of stuff included in that. A quick rundown of some of those programs is $130 billion towards school reopening, with funds going towards ventilation system upgrades, reduced class sizes, personal protective equipment, $39 million in a grant towards child care providers, as well as $1 billion for the Head Start program. There's some subsidies to COBRA with a premium reduction of 85% through September, $5 billion into an existing pandemic EBT program for low-income families, $1.4 billion for older adults under the Older Americans Act, including nutrition programs, support services, and disease prevention programs. There's also $50 billion for reimbursing state, local, tribal, and territorial governments for their COVID-19 response expenses. $30 billion to public transit, and included in that is $8 billion to airports, $3 billion to aerospace manufacturing for temporary payroll support, $1.5 billion to Amtrak, and then $3 billion towards the Economic Development Administration. There's also an expansion of child tax credits to $3,000 per child up to the age of 17. There's some Obamacare premium subsidies. There's $46 billion to the Department of Health and Human Services, $7.5 billion to the CDC, and another billion for them to strengthen confidence in the vaccine, $5.2 billion to the HHS, $7.6 billion to the HHS for their public health workforce, $10 billion to spending under the Defense Production Act, and then $350 billion towards state, local, tribal, and territorial funding, split 60% for states and 40% for localities. I could go on and on.
Also, what about the bad shit? Is there any bad, genuinely not good stuff in there?
That is a very good question. That's a very good question. For some of these seem superfluous. I'm not trying to rag on the seniors here, but $1 billion to them for their nutrition programs seems a bit extra, in my opinion. And it's also weird to me that they can just kind of funnel all of this money, into some program like that. We're also paying out aerospace manufacturing payroll. What are the aerospace companies doing right now? If anything, they have less expenses. No one's flying.
They're building the bombs to drop on Syria. They're very important right now.
I forgot about that.
You got to replace those bombs that they used this week.
They're bleeding cash on that one, man.
I mean, the thing that bothers me is that the government is very willing to drop billions of dollars to support aerospace defense companies and airports, and very, very reluctant to drop any billions of dollars to forgive student loans, which isn't even an affirmative payment by the government. It's just canceling a revenue stream that they already know for a lot of people they're not going to be able to pay, and a ton of money goes into collections. So that is a way smaller expense that's way less of a big deal for the government. And if you need to make up, how about take back the Trump tax cuts that were trillions of dollars and get that money back, and you will have your revenue stream immediately
Completely agree.
recovered. And this crisis will be over for the millions of Americans suffering under it. So that's my main takeaway, is just rage at the unwillingness to support our generation and the generation below us, and the immense cavalier
Yeah.
approach to supporting other generations like baby boomers. Like, our whole government works for boomers and we are invisible.
Yeah, something I noticed actually. So, I was doing research on my people on my team, and it's actually Mark Kelly who's on this. There's a special committee on aging in the Senate. I didn't know that existed, but apparently there's a whole entire committee on the aging population in America.
Let's talk about the $15 minimum wage, because there's a lot to unpack there.
Sure. So the House kept this segment of the bill in, even though in the Senate it was suggested by the Senate parliamentarian that this would not have, we'll get there, this wasn't going to have a big enough impact on the budget for it to be considered under budget reconciliation.
I thought we had a Congress, not a parliament.
Hey.
That's what they should say to this individual when they said that. Who is the parliamentarian, by the way?
Her name is Elizabeth Mcdonough.
Okay, are they an elected representative, or are they like?
No. So they're appointed by the Senate Majority Leader. And there is just whenever the Senate Majority Leader wants to get rid of them. So our current Senate parliamentarian is Elizabeth Mcdonough, and she was appointed in 2012. By Harry Reid, the former Majority Leader, during, I guess that was Obama,
Wow.
presidency. So she's been here basically this entire decade, and like she's had good reviews.
On Yelp.
She's had
5 stars on Yelp.
Yelp. You guys remember the like teacher rating websites?
Yeah.
Yeah, rate by professor. We need one of those for government.
Rate my rep.
Rate my rep. I'm gonna look it up right now.
Yeah. Sure. So the parliamentarian's not an elected position, and they have an indeterminate term length. I don't think that this position is democratic. None of their rulings. So what they do is that they just decide what can and can't be done for like Senate reconciliation process. So just for like this topic, right now they're trying to pass this reconciliation bill. And so she determines what can or can't be done on that. And so she determined that this $15 minimum wage provision inside of the COVID relief bill does not follow what's called the Byrd Rule. And the Byrd Rule is basically just like 6 cases that something that's in the reconciliation bill makes it ineligible for reconciliation, for being able to be voted on for reconciliation. And the one thing that she says that this provision does not, the one thing that the provision does not get approved for is this. It's if it produces a change in outlays or revenues which is merely incidental to the non-budgetary components of the provision. That our provision for the $15 minimum wage is merely incidental to the budget as a whole. So, it's basically saying that, or she's saying that having a $15 minimum wage isn't going to make an impact on the federal budget. Therefore, it can't be used for reconciliation voting, which is ridiculous because it's obviously going to have an impact on the federal budget if everyone's making, or the people who are in minimum wage are making $15 an hour.
Yeah, including all of the government workers who are going to get pay raises.
The federal government is paying janitors, cleaners, maids. They're paying all of those people minimum wage. This is not going to be an insignificant amount of people. That is, if it's as big of an expenditure and as big of a deal as the business community has been making it out to be, that is going to be a huge increase in the federal budget. Not huge, like undoable. Obviously, we have unlimited sums of money to throw at the military. Like, it absolutely should be done. But
Federal Reserve has infinite amounts of money.
The Federal Reserve is constantly printing money. So that just seems like a farcical argument.
But I do want to point out that her ruling, the parliamentarians' ruling, is not binding. So the Senate leader can just override it and have the vote on it as reconciliation anyway.
Who is her boss, by the way?
So her boss is the president of the Senate, who is the vice president, Kamala Harris. So.
Right. I remember this part.
Convenient. Guess who can overrule the parliamentarians' ruling?
Kamala
Harris, her boss.
Yeah.
Guess whose office said they were not going to overrule the Senate parliamentarians' non-binding ruling? The White House, twice. The chief of staff and the thing that Anthony Scaramucci used to be.
The press secretary.
The press secretary, thank you. Both of them said that they're going to respect the ruling, quote unquote, literally hiding under procedure.
Are the Democrats just afraid of like pushback? Like, why are they so feckless?
No, they don't care about us. Joe Biden doesn't care about us at all. Joe Biden cares about bombing Syria, making his corporate sponsors a ton of money, and staying in power. And like the fundamental ideology of these people that are in the White House is that the system running in business as usual is the best way to run the government. And they don't want to disrupt anything. They don't want to change the laws. They don't want to improve people's lives. They just want to keep the system running as it is because it's made them and their donors incredibly wealthy. That is my very cynical take on the matter.
Yeah, they're basically just using this as a reason to not do anything when they can easily do something about it. So like I said, the Senate Majority Leader can dismiss the parliamentarian and appoint a new one, but I don't think Schumer's going to do it.
Progressive leaders have called for that as well. Ilhan Omar tweeted about it. Pramila Jayapal called for the ruling to be overturned. And all the progressives are saying that this is really the death knell for Democrats in 2022 if they do not get this minimum wage passed, because this was a big campaign promise. And everyone can see that they have the power to make it happen, and they're affirmatively choosing not to. A little bit of positive news, though. Bernie Sanders does have other ideas because Bernie is amazing and he always has other ideas.
Please do tell about
that.
So
he is thinking of let me find my sites really quickly. So he proposed that instead they impose penalties and incentives to push companies towards a higher wage. So this is kind of like what we talked about in a previous episode, treating big corporations and small businesses differently. So what Sanders proposed is an amendment to the current stimulus that would take tax deductions away from large profitable corporations that don't pay workers at least a $15 minimum wage. And then on the flip side, for small businesses, they would provide financial incentives that those small businesses need in order to get them to raise the wage. So he's looking at using like economic power and leverage that way instead of making it a law, which I think is smart.
Super smart.
If you
Definitely
guys
smart.
notice this week,
Ugh.
Sanders actually bullied Costco into raising the minimum wage to $15 an
They
hour.
bullied Amazon too. He bullied Amazon.
They raised it. Did they raise it though?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, I'm surprised by that because Amazon really hates their workers.
Yeah, I know. No, they're like touting $15 minimum wage now, like Amazon is, but they got pressured into Bernie.
That's incredible.
Pressured by Bernie. Yeah.
Literally one man. Amazing.
Literally one fucking dude looking out. Like we've got one guy.
Can you imagine
in
if
the
we had
entire
two
government.
senators? How powerful we would be if we had two senators that gave a shit.
Fucking Warren doing nothing as
The
usual.
Right.
Ugh.
Really quickly, I just verified that if Kamala were to overrule the parliamentarian, technically 60 some senators could vote to overturn her overturning of the parliamentarian, but of course that would not happen. Well, I mean, with the way we have our Senate, who knows?
It's totally doable in the Senate. 100%.
But they don't want to because they want something to hide behind. That way they can keep their corporate overlords happy.
Maybe they just don't like it in the way that it. Then why run on it? I just don't even. Yeah, it's
Because they wanted the votes. Like,
yeah.
I'm surprised you have so much faith in politicians not lying to people.
No, I know.
This is like a
It's just like,
stereotype.
yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair.
I mean, it's just like the $2,000 checks thing. It's now $1,400, even though they had literal ads printed with massive checks that had $2,000 on it. But they got the people that they needed to vote for them, so who cares?
Yeah, pretty embarrassing.
Kevin, what's your take? Are you feeling as cynical as we are?
Yeah, definitely. I don't believe that the parliamentarian should be a appointed position,
Yeah, it should be an elected position.
Yeah, and possibly have one of the senators be the parliament.
Yeah, the parliamentarian. Yeah, exactly. That's what I expected. That I thought it was someone within the government. I thought it was like one of the members of Congress. Like I'm stunned to find out that it's not, to be honest.
They have a salary of $172,000 a year.
The parliamentarian does?
A parliamentarian. All they do is say what is and what's not eligible for reconciliation, and they get paid $170.
So they talk once every 4 years.
Budget reconciliation occurs once a year, can occur maximally once a year, and it doesn't always.
Oh my God.
That's repulsive. So they can pay that worthless position all that money, but they can't pay the American people a $15 minimum wage.
Yeah.
I also think that I think this is a good example of like a common misconception about American politics. So the executive branch is this massive, bloated thing that is essentially our government. Like the branches are supposed to be co-equal to a certain extent, but the executive branch is made up of every agency, every task force, every committee, besides the congressional committees that Congress ever creates. So most of these pieces of legislation come along with like a committee or department that's set up underneath the president and implements the legislation. And legislation is often pretty vague. So they're in charge of making all the rules, all the follow through, all the implementation. So a lot of our laws are just made by these unelected people who are appointed by the president. And Joe Biden runs all of that stuff. So when he's saying that he is so shocked, I mean, he didn't say this, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the characterization of the ICE deportations of 900 people recently was positioned as something he had no control over because the judge in Texas put a pause on his executive order. He's ICE's boss. Like, he is directly ICE's boss. He's in charge of all these agencies. So everything that the government's doing that's not the legislature, Joe Biden is directly responsible for. And if he's not responsible for it, it's the person who's responsible to him, who's responsible to the next person. Like, he's in charge of the entire chain of command for the vast majority of the government. So the narrative that Joe Biden is politically powerless is just not factual at all.
We could also talk about how being in this position for long enough, Biden still hasn't changed the U.S. Postmaster General. It's still Louis DeJoy. He's still got people in these offices who are like supposed to be completely, they're Trump appointees. They're supposed to be directly in opposition to Biden's beliefs. And yet, for whatever reason, he acts like he's hamstrung here when he's literally the guy calling the shots.
And I don't know about you guys, but a lot of my mail is taking a long ass time because of that guy.
Oh my God. Fire DeJoy. Fire the parliamentarian while you're at it. I believe Ilhan called for firing the parliamentarian a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Good.
My girl racking up the points.
Seriously.
Yeah. Not enough.
No, I'm second to last place. So yeah, not
yeah. Mila is in front of you. How does that feel, Lexi?
Hey, don't talk trash about my sister.
Parliamentarian isn't even like an antiquated position that like, oh, it's been here forever. You can't get rid of it. Like, it was made in 1935.
Wow.
It's not what the founders would have wanted.
Yeah, that's not originalism. I shouldn't say she because it's different people all the time, but the Senate parliamentarian has been overruled a bunch of times in history, not super frequently, but enough where it's a practice under different administrations. So it happened, Ro Khanna actually said in the Washington Post that LBJ's vice president routinely overruled the Senate parliamentarian. And it was also done during the Ford administration in 1975. So all of the like boogeyman, like, oh, it's so partisan to overrule the parliamentarian. This is not without precedent. And it was used to give the rich tax cuts in 2001. So
also all this like fear mongering about people being biased or partisan. I voted for you to be partisan. I explicitly wanted you to be a partisan member of Congress. God. What is going on? I don't understand the fear behind it, and I don't understand how it's keeping our Congress captive.
No, Luis. We need a strong Republican Party, okay? So, calm down.
Oh man,
also,
I'm not ready for that satire.
There are no good Rate My Representative like websites. I have scoured the internet.
Tragic.
I mean, I feel like in a lot of places it would just reflect the like who votes for that person in the first place. So like if 70% of district voted for their rep and the 30% voted for someone different, then it would reflect like, oh, they've got 3.5 out of 5 stars.
That's true. That's a very good point.
So basically our voting system is our radar rep.
Except it's not, because Mitch McConnell still keeps getting elected.
Yeah, I would say you'd be surprised because it's very common for blue states to have a red governor and vice versa, right? Where people will pick someone from the opposite party. I don't know if it's just to like have all things balanced as they should be or whatever.
Second Thanos reference of the podcast.
But yeah, I don't know if Mitch McConnell would have 3.5 stars. I would posit he wouldn't even have more than 1.5 stars, really.
Yeah. How would you rate my rep app like not be gerrymandered though?
Yeah, so I'm looking at one right here where like literally every person with an A is a Republican.
Wow.
Every single one.
But if they want to sponsor next week. Kidding.
Oh my God.
So it looks like we only have about 5 minutes left, and I just want to turn it over to Kevin and get any hot takes that you have about this session of Congress.
Well, it's only been 2 months. They're already having problems with just like, is this bipartisan, and should it be bipartisan? And it's going to be like this. I'm guessing for the next 3 years, and it's going to just be like how it was in the old days, just like Joe Biden wants it, and it's going to be uninteresting. It's going to make me bored of politics like it used to be.
I'm surprised you think we'll get past 2022 and still have these same dynamics. I think it'll be a much, much worse.
So you have Joe Manchin on your team, famed enemy of the pod. What is your take on how he's performing?
Well, I don't like anything that he said. But he is getting me lots of fantasy points because
he is talking a lot.
Yeah, he's talking a lot. He's appearing in a lot of articles.
This is why we said no Republicans on the podcast, because we do not want to be cheering on fucking Mitch McConnell.
But we played ourselves because half the Democrats are basically Republicans.
Yep.
I will say though, with a team full of all progressives, I am second. So it is possible.
Say, with a team full of squad members, I am second to last. So
yeah, that's also true.
You just have to have Chuck Schumer on your team, and then you're all the way at the top.
Who knows? No. He might be becoming our new progressive star. We'll see.
Right. Right. I think he's going to take a very Cuomo-esque turn.
Oh God.
That's my prediction.
Dangerous.
For Chuck Schumer.
I mean, Cuomo, you mean the guy who murdered seniors and sexually harassed 2 aides? Cuomo's had a week.
Oh, he has.
Shannon's doubling down. He's like, yep.
I think Schumer is going to go on a very Cuomo-like route for his career. That's my guess.
Before we close out, I do want to draw attention to 2 things that the Biden administration did this week. This is going to get dark very quickly, but he bombed Syria. He did a drone strike in Syria in retaliation for an Iranian attack that occurred in Iraq. So he bombed a sovereign nation that had absolutely nothing to do with what happened. In that attack, 1 person died who was not an American. So fewer American citizens than were killed in the January 6th Capitol riot, and our president saw fit to bomb Syria. The second thing is what's going on in immigration. He reopened one of the child detention centers on the U.S.-Mexico border. This is one of the detention centers that was very unabashedly criticized under the Trump administration as being a concentration camp for children. It is literally a facility for 13 to 17-year-olds who are crossing the border by themselves and have, as the Biden administration has admitted, people that they're trying to meet up with in the U.S., caretakers. These are not children who are going to be homeless. These are children who have places to go and who should not be in prison regardless. So that was a really big moment for me this week in politics. It was personally, for me, I felt like Biden was showing exactly where he stands on these issues. And it was a very disheartening and honestly, like upsetting experience to see some of the same policies that Trump has been putting in place that are super destructive and that Democrats were so against. All of a sudden, Joe Biden does it and there's no commentary. So I just wanted to highlight that. Sorry to kill the mood. If anyone else has some other thoughts about these, frankly, atrocities, please jump in.
Yeah, in addition to the bombing in Syria, Joe Biden didn't brief any of the armed services committees before he did it. And I think that's just very telling on how his presidency is going to go.
Yeah, they've called for briefings about it immediately. And his White House press secretary currently tweeted in 2017 about the Trump administration. What is the legal authority for strikes in Syria? Assad is a brutal dictator, but Syria is a sovereign country.
This is Jen Psaki.
Yep.
Wow. So also to add to the misery, I thought it was very interesting that we admitted that that MBS, the
oh God,
whatever of Saudi Arabia killed Jamal Khashoggi. And we decided for our for our Saudi partners that a killing results in no repercussions. But
a brutal homicide, like the most disturbing thing I've ever heard happen in real life.
But when an Iranian, but when a Shia, there's something there, that's where the bombing strike happens against Iran. So pardon Saudi Arabia, attack Iran. That's the message that was communicated to me this week in terms of foreign policy.
We are trying to get Iran to come to the table to do another.
Right, exactly.
We're literally waiting on their
response. Perfect timing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good faith action on our part.
Yeah. Well, we are closing out now. Thank you so much, Kevin, for guest starring on our podcast.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Misery loves company.